Hello. I'm Linda Brault. This is Cindy Arstein-Kerslake, and we have to stand in this little box. And that is not the way I roll. So watch me. I will do okay. I'll be moving like this. Anyway, welcome. We're really happy to have you here. We did put handouts out to most of you who are here. Is there an extra set of handouts anywhere? If there is, let us know. All of these handouts, for those of you watching virtually, are also online. So, they're in the whatever you do to download, they're all there. So we wanted you to have these here today because we're going to actually do a couple of activities that will be easier if you have them physically in your presence, okay? So I want to get a little sense of who's here today, if I could. So if you are working with birth to 3-year-olds, raise your hand. Okay. If you are working with 3 to 5-year-olds, raise your hand. I know some of you will raise your hand multiple times. If you are working with school age, raise your hand. And if you're working primarily with adults, raise your hand. Okay, so we have quite a range. Good to know. If you are early childhood special education or early intervention, now I'm standing right in front of the slide. If you are early childhood special ed or early intervention, raise your hand, please. Okay, so you're a little spread around. If you are typical child development, raise your hand. If you are elementary school general ed, okay. If you are other and don't fit anything that I just said. So we had people from agency representatives, other things. Okay, I'm going to do, I know I'm not showing right now. I'm going to do this so I don't have to keep turning around. Public school, county office. All right. Early intervention vendor. Anybody here with vendors? Head Start, early Head Start. Childcare settings or an agency. Family support. Yay! And then, of course, other. I love other. How many of you are directly working with children and/or families? Raise your hand. Okay, awesome. And how many of you are more administration or support? So about half and half. And who's got to raise your hand for other? Somebody will. There you go. Other. Woot, woot, we're in the house. Okay. So beginning together is something that has been around for 20 years. Some of you may be familiar with it. For the first 20 years, we focused on supporting people who were training in the program for infant and toddler care as they wanted to include children with disabilities and inclusive information into their trainings. Starting this last year, we have expanded to include birth through 5 for preschool, but then Cindy, we have other projects, and one of our projects is the Map to Inclusion and Belonging, which is really birth to age 22, and then we have the California Teaching Pyramid, which is birth through early elementary. So we have, lots of different age groups in mind. But what we want you to know about is we are really interested in getting inclusion out there. And so we have been training inclusion facilitators, some of whom are here today, and we're going to hopefully have more information out at the community level about how we can make this work in our communities. So we have some practical tools, we have training content on the strategies, and we really know it's all about relationships. That, as Fred Rogers is very popular again, with all the movies and specials and things, he wrote, "You bring all you ever were and are to any relationship you have today." And we know how important relationships are in anything, any of the work we do, any work, including work with children with disabilities and their families, including work on children with children with challenging behavior, and for those of you who work with adults, helping adults feel connected and in relationship. So why begin together? We happen to think that what is good for all children is good for children with disabilities. So we want to make sure that children with disabilities have access to those high quality programs. The second reason is all children deserve good quality care. Parents of children with disabilities work too. And so we know that children should be together from the beginning. And then finally, attitudes and attitudes and confidence build through experience. So we know that for children, when they are raised in inclusive settings, they do better in the long run. They have better outcomes on testing. And that inclusion really does raise children up when it's done well. And then finally, together we're better. So when we started thinking about how we would work across this larger age group and what we would do to move the needle, because some of you know inclusion is not a new concept. We've been working on and talking about inclusion for over 35 years, and we're still talking about it. So Cindy will tell the rest.
Okay, so again, I'm Cindy Arstein-Kerslake, and I am the coordinator of the Map to Inclusion and Belonging website. And my job is to collect and promote resources that support child care providers and early childhood educators in including kids with disabilities in their program. Now, I've been doing this for over 10 years, but my other full-time job is as a parent of a young adult with a disability. So inclusion has been a lifelong and ongoing effort for the past 33 years. No matter what the setting, it's important for my daughter Sarah to feel welcome, to be engaged in a meaningful activity that she likes, and to be respected, to feel valued, to have her efforts acknowledged, to have friends, and to be included. And then she'll smile, and she'll be present. Exclusion is a painful and traumatic experience. Dan Siegel said, as part of a conference addressing mental health and developmental disabilities, that the experience of exclusion in your brain is like being hit with a red-hot poker. It's traumatic. I am fully invested in inclusion. The happiness of so many people depend on it. My personal mission is to inspire and promote inclusion of people with disabilities in all settings. Okay, so why are you here? Why did you choose this session? As Glenn Singleton said this morning, what is your intention? Are you here with a team? What are your values related to inclusion? Do you and your team agree on those values? Do you have a personal vision for inclusion? We're going to take a look at that. Linda will kind of introduce you to and give you some time to think about a vision for your team and a vision for yourself personally, and how important it is to start with a vision. Okay, and that's really how we started. When our team was asked to develop an institute that would lead to a certificate for a preschool inclusion facilitators, some of us who worked for Linda and Linda were ambivalent about it, because most of us have been involved in training projects and initiatives over the past 30 years, and we just haven't gotten anywhere. And the reason really for that is there hasn't been the political will, there hasn't been state leadership, there hasn't been a systematic framework for funding to make inclusion possible. And so it was a little bit dismal. The other thing, progress for expanding inclusion has been only 5% in 40 years. So we were a little bit skeptical, and we were asking Linda where we were going to go with this. What would she like to see as an outcome for this institute, and what would she like inclusion facilitators to be able to do. And she said, in frustration, change the world!
That's it. That's all I wanted.
And that shut us up for the rest of the staff meeting. But I took that home with me. And I thought, this is just what we need. We need to all want to change the world. And I think we can do it with a common vision of changing the world. So what does an inclusion facilitator do? An inclusion facilitator changes the world. Every member of a team that works with a child of a disability is an inclusion facilitator. Administrators, supervisors, program directors, special educators, decision makers, they can all change the world. They will be looking at infrastructure and funding and coordination and ongoing support needed to change the world for sustainable inclusion. Teachers, specialists, therapists will change the world as they work together to learn from each other, to gain skills to implement universal design for learning, provide individual instruction, and modifications and accommodations. Teachers and families will change the world as they communicate daily about the needs, efforts, and accomplishments of the child and support the development of friendships both inside and outside the classroom. The children will change the world as they grow and thrive and shine because they are included. Our institute gives information, instruction, and tons of resources. But most importantly, it gives dedicated time for you to take stock of your own resources and develop your own vision to make your plan to change the world. And I just want to give you an update on what we have accomplished so far. We've completed 2 institutes, and we've had our first community of practice webinar where teams who are participating reported on their progress. And the teams have gone far beyond the requirements of inclusion facilitator, and they truly have shown us that they have a vision for implementing inclusion district-wide in their programs, and they've been inspired to change the world. So Linda's going to tell you more about what this change process is all about and what you need to do.
Okay, so change happens at different levels. You know, I was frustrated when I said we just have to change the world, but then as Cindy came back and said, you know, that's exactly right. It's great to have that to hang on to. So we really have embraced it. Oh, I don't have my microphone on. Oh, that doesn't bother you in the room because I have one of those voices, but it bothers the people on TV thing. So when you're including one child, just one child in a program, that changes the world for that child and family. And if you're supporting changes in a classroom, then that's changing the world for that whole classroom of children and families. When we do it in a site, and we have inclusion in several different programs, think of the ripple effect. Now you've got more staff including kids and experiencing this. And then finally, if you can get it to a district or agency or a community, that's where we really start seeing that big change. One of the analogies I talk about with change is about resistance, because we all know there's resistance. So if you've ever done science activities with kids about surface tension, Anybody ever done those? It's very fun. So you get the big vat of water, and then you lay down like a little fish net that covers the water with the little knots in it. If you pick up just one knot and pull, you get a lot of resistance because surface tension is holding on to that net. So when you're trying to pull it up, it'll be like, is yours off? Okay, I'm just making a lot of, oh, you know what it is? It's my name tag making noise. Okay, and then if you have everybody gather around and everybody grab a knot and you say 1, 2, 3, lift, it comes right up because now we've disturbed the tension. That's what these ripples can do. You have one place that it changes, and that is going to make it easier for more places to grab the knot. So we really want to think about how we can not get discouraged when we see change slowly, but say we're building that way to raise all the boats. So small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. So that's why we can't get discouraged. I can't get discouraged. However, no problem can be solved by the same consciousness that created it. We have to learn to see the world anew. So we know that there's been lots of things happening. We have to sort of think differently. So our topic and what we wanted to focus on was inclusion into regular or general early childhood programs for young children with disabilities. So we're focused in our institute on birth to 5. It can go up into all ages, of course. So what I want you to do right now, and if you're all, nobody's by themselves at a table, good. There are 3 slides in a row here, and those of you at home will have to look on your PowerPoint. There are 3 slides in a row that offer some definitions for inclusion. And I think it's important whenever we're having a conversation to think about what we mean by inclusion. So what I want you to do, and if you have a pen or pencil, you just want to underline or circle words that really stand out to you or phrases that you think are just really good. And what I'm going to do is just give you a couple of minutes to look at them by yourself. So there's 3 slides. There's this one that's from the California Education Code. There's this one that is from Inclusion Works, the book somebody will be getting at the end of the day. And the last one is from the policy statement on inclusion of early childhood that was done by the Education Department and the Health and Human Services Department at the federal level. So those are 3 definitions, and I just want you to look at those, circle them, and then I'm going to give you a few minutes to talk to your partners at the table. I know I turned it back on now. There's just the 3. So if when you talk to your neighbors at your table, would you please introduce yourself if you don't know one another, and then just share some things that stood out for you. So I'm going to give you just a few minutes. It says 10. It might be a little less because you're hopefully kind of smaller tables. So please talk amongst yourselves. Those of you at home, feel free to talk amongst yourselves. That's good. So you're yes. The questions. About 1 more minute, so make sure so other people get to talk. I hope that was a minute. I forgot to look. I'm really bad, too. It's usually like 30 seconds if I don't look. Some of the people on the other end of the virtual said they couldn't hear me with the other mic, so I'm going to use this one. So we'll see how that goes. For me to not be heard, that's something, boy. So that's good. All right. Did anything... And this is the one we would normally pass around. So if you say something, I'm going to have to repeat it. So just so you know. And I want you to say something. Was there anything that kind of, as a table, you all sort of gravitated to? Was there anything like that happened? Yes. So holler it out. Or here, I'm going to. We'll try that.
Do I have? Okay. So on the slide that was on the next page, the part that we all kind of agreed on was where it says that there's a sense of belonging, and that's something that I think we've all kind of taken away from today. Is that not only do we need to include them, but we need to make them feel like they belong, like this is for them as well as it is for everyone else. And then the other thing that we really liked on the first definition was where it says regardless of ability. That just kind of stuck out to us.
I'm going to try this one again and hope that maybe, since we're passing this around, I'll go back and forth between the two. Anyone else have something that stood out that might be a little different? Okay, getting her exercise in, going to the back.
On the second slide, we really liked how it said if supports are needed, they are provided appropriately. So oftentimes people think that special education is a place and not a service. And so they're gen ed kids first, and the supports are provided to them in their gen ed class.
Right. Thank you for liking that one. We're also, the first thing everybody thinks of is a one-on-one aid. Oh, this child needs a one-on-one aid. That's not the typical need. And so I think that's the other thing, that people jump to the most restrictive as opposed to the least. Anyone else have anything that stood out to them? In the front? You're debating. I called on you, so now you have to.
I like the programs designed for children who are typically developing a broad range of activities.
Is that in the third one?
The first slide, it says a broad range of activities and contexts.
Mm-hmm.
And the second slide, it says programs designed for children who are typically developing, including childcare.
Yeah, so really that broad range, and I think that's very important. And one more?
I like the part that said authentic sense of belonging for the child and the family.
Right, right. They do kind of come together in this age. They don't just enroll on their own, right? So that's always important to know. So we offer these definitions, and when we do this with in our institute, we are often training large teams, and we encourage the teams to either adopt a definition or create a definition from amongst the three, but to come up with something that they can share with people in the community that is meaningful and would resonate with people who are parents of children with disabilities, parents of children who are typically developing, general ed teachers, special ed teachers, administrators, etc. So I just want to say that if you have not yet read this policy statement on inclusion for early childhood, I highly recommend it. It is included as one of your handouts, but I did not make copies of it because it's super long. But you can download it, and it's really thoughtful, and we're going to, in fact, take some more. There's several more quotes from it throughout the work that I'm going to be doing with you, and we're going to, it has some recommendations for implementation. It also has lots of resources that are linked from federal things that have been funded. So again, I encourage you to use this or to make it known to people within your communities as a resource. Inclusion is a national focus again. It has been off and on, but right now it's really caught on. And as you know, in California, there's a specific push, hopefully all of you know, that there's been this real interest and money behind it. So there's these inclusion grants that everybody's still, half of them are writing them even as we speak. But I think it's really important to understand they're time limited, and they are intended to, do some of that. Okay, guys, let's get going. And do let me know if they're still not hearing me.
Right here.
Okay. We just are going to be fun today. All right, so here's the policy statement that I mentioned, and I do encourage you to read it. Now, sometimes another definition that you need is who are we talking about? Who are the children? So I think it's important to know that we do have children who have identified disabilities. There's children who get a diagnosis at or before birth or shortly after birth. There's also children who have additional needs. They need extra support. They have behavioral concerns. They may not receive a diagnosis or have an identified disability, but they require a lot of extra time and attention in anyway. And the majority of children are not identified at birth. So it's a lot of children are in childcare before they are identified. And so that's something for you to be aware of. One of the things that we like to know, and I know that this conference always includes a person first terminology, so we will primarily use person first language. What's been fascinating to me as I've been in this field for a long time is watching how language changes. So currently there's always been some communities that were proud of their disability and claimed it. So if you were in the deaf community, you were deaf. You're not a person with deafness. That was a very strong value in for most people in that community. We now have a group of adults who have been raised and who have reclaimed some of their disabilities. So there's people with autism who prefer to be called autistic, and they think us neurotypicals have the problem. So it's interesting and it's fun in some ways to read these adults' perspectives, because I think I've learned so much from children and adults with disabilities, and I continue to be really aware of and interested in what people who've been raised have to say to us that are now working with this other generation. So again, I encourage you to look at that. We also have been moving away from the term special needs. For years, adults with disabilities have not liked that term. I'll just tell you right out. I have had people say to me, I'm not special. Don't, you know, there's this disability and get over it. But there were parents who were like, oh, disability, so hard. So we went to special needs, but it sort of became a euphemism. And it was, again, it sort of became a barrier to just moving forward. So you will notice that we don't use that term very much anymore, and we're kind of changing the language. And again, if you're interested, we have articles and such for you to give you information. We also will sometimes say parent or family member, and we mean anybody who's responsible for raising the child. Sometimes it's a foster parent, a grandparent, an aunt. So when we say parent or family member, we're talking about those people. And then because we work with general early childhood people, a lot of times when we say specialist, they think, oh, the infant specialist. But when we say specialist, we're basically talking about children with special education or nursing or physical therapy, occupational therapy, those kinds of specialty training. So is specific on disabilities. All right, so that's kind of what we're doing. The main bottom line is it's about being respectful. So my favorite story about person first language was one of the parents was going to speak on a panel with me, and she talked to her son, who was now a high schooler, and she was going to share some of his early childhood work. And she said, well, you know, do you want me to say that you're physically challenged? Do you want me to name your disability? What do you want me to do? And he goes, can't you just call me James? Yes, I can, she said. And really and truly, at the end of the day, that's what's important, is it's about the child, the person, the adult. I think it's important to understand that part of the reason we do push for person first is that when you have a child with a disability, you suddenly have 14 more appointments than your friends who had a baby the same time. And you keep going, everywhere you go, they're talking about all the things that you didn't even know you needed to know. And so it's called disability spread. It sort of takes over your life. And what we always want to remember and remind people of is children are children, and they need what children need. And so by putting the person first, we are sort of helping remember that. It's also, you don't say that a child is suffering from something. You know, they just happen to have a disability. They aren't suffering from it. So those are the kinds of things that kind of happen. So let's see. And then we talk about inclusive practice, and this is something that I know you've heard in some of the other parts, but it's really looking at each child's strengths and characteristics and abilities and interests as we're planning for things in the environment. And when we do that, you always want to get input from family members. And if you do have children with diagnoses, there's other people who can give you information. So you want to be sure you're getting information from all the people involved in the child. And then you want to do the appropriate adaptation or accommodation that is really supporting the belonging, which a lot of you got to. And belonging is something that I used to have to tell people what it meant, but it's really nice that it's much more out there now. But essentially, belonging is promoted through the inclusive practice. So Norman Kuntz, who is one of my heroes, and some of you may have heard him speak before, has this quote that we use on the homepage of our Map to Inclusion and Belonging. And that is, I'm going to read it for you, but I'm going to have a drink of water first. When inclusion is fully embraced, we abandon the idea that children have to become normal in order to contribute to the world. Instead, we search for and nourish the gifts that are inherent in all people. we begin to look beyond typical ways of becoming valued members of the community, and in doing so, begin to realize the achievable goal of providing all children with an authentic sense of belonging. So there you are. And I think, as people pointed out, everybody wants to belong. You know, families want to belong. And I think, as I just pointed out, when you have a child who has a diagnosis, you have some things that aren't in common with your friends. So that belonging becomes challenging. You also have a whole new set of people that you get to talk to, and some of those may end up being people that you can really feel a connection of belonging to. But we want to make sure that families still feel that sense of belonging. We know that children need to belong in order to grow, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. And staff want to feel like they're competent at what they're doing. What I find is, well, I think I talk about this later, but I'm going to say it now. When I hear providers, childcare providers, infant and preschool teachers, when they say they're afraid of inclusion, they're not afraid of the children. They're afraid they're going to do something wrong. They're afraid for the children. And so that's why we want to really make sure we are providing the appropriate supports, and we don't have people that are feeling like I'm going to do something wrong. So this is where belonging can really help us understand. And this also came from Norman Kuntz. And basically what he reminds us of is Maslow's hierarchy. Anybody remember Maslow's hierarchy? You all get exposed to it in some 1 or 2 psychology child development classes, right? And if you haven't been exposed to it, look it up. It's a good one. But Maslow's hierarchy points out that in order for us to move through our lives, there are needs that we have. And the very most basic need is for food, water, shelter, and warmth. So this room is not freezing, which is amazing, because meeting rooms often are freezing. But if it was freezing, or if it was super hot, that's going to impact your comfort. The chairs aren't so bad, right? I've been in worse chairs. But there's things that now you're all going to be going, oh, the chairs. You know, that physical environment is more important than we sometimes realize. And that's true for children as well. So their physical needs have to be met. The second thing that as we go up is security. Children have to feel like somebody's got their back. They have to feel safe. And if you're a child with a physical disability and you're not sure this adult knows how to position you so that you're going to be able to use your hands, you're going to be fearful. You're going to say, I'm not secure in this. So that's where part of this comes in sometimes. But we also know that children need to have that sense that they're cared for. And we know with the increase in trauma-informed information that some children don't come to us with a good sense of security. So we have to be looking at that all the time. After they have their physical needs met, they feel secure, then they can start looking at relationships and looking at belonging. This is where belonging happens. It's like those other pieces are settled, now I can connect. I can start connecting to other people. And only after all those 3 are done, can you learn? Like your brain is not open to learning if you're still trying to figure out, am I safe? Am I fed? Am I secure? Do I have belonging? And unfortunately, what has happened in a lot of places is we flipped the script. We actually have said to children, you have to know how to walk before you can come to this center, or you have to know how to keep your hands to yourself. We have put learning ahead of belonging. And what we forget is children can't learn when they know their belonging is conditional. So it's an interruption, it's an interference with their ability to really relax and learn. I do have this thing from Norman. I'm trying to think about our time. I'm going to wait and see if we have time for it later, because I have other videos. All right. So all means all. When we talk about children, we talk about all. And even though we know all means all, we've learned we have to spell it out sometimes, right? All children, including children with disabilities. And so one of the things that's nice is when we've been focusing on quality, children with disabilities do better in settings that are of high quality. And the reason for that is children with disabilities don't have the same amount of coping skills. So when the ratios are off or the teacher has a 50-minute circle time, the kids who maybe have better coping skills will learn how to zone out and be polite. And that kid with a disability is like, heck no, I'm out of here, and off they go. And the truth of the matter is they're the canaries in the coal mine. They're our early warning sign that it's more of a quality issue sometimes. So here's a little video that just shows you what inclusion can look like. So this was done by I think the DRDP project. We'll see. Oh, what happened? I was so cocky because the last one worked just fine.
We see so much progress in our inclusive settings. It just is a lot happier of an environment for all kids, for families, as well as our staff. So it's just a win-win.
I see how much empathy the inclusive classroom builds. The kids get so excited when they get to actually do what all the typically developing kids are doing, when they're helping each other out. Just having everybody being involved has just been wonderful to see.
Inclusive classrooms are great for all of the kids. For the children who have an IEP, they learn from their peers. They want to learn from their peers. They want to imitate what they do. They watch them carefully. The typical peers, they might, that very first week or so, say, well, doesn't he talk? Or why can't he walk? And ask some questions, but you give them a very simple explanation, or it's just like, well, she's going to learn and you're going to help teach her. How about that? And then they just, oh, okay. And then they're fine with it. And then they don't even seem to notice it. I think that's so wonderful. We've got a variety of different adaptations in here, and they are so helpful for the kids. If they can't tell us maybe verbally what they want for lunch, we've got our little communication menu, letting us know what they want, or making choices, or telling us yes, no by using a device, or pointing and picking things up, and the kids that are working on something, like feeding themselves, and wouldn't be able to do it with a regular spoon if they have an adapted spoon that's built up and it's got a curved bowl. We have this really nice equipment for outside. So we've got, an adapted bicycle that the kids can get on, and the gait trainers for the kids who aren't able to walk. So often they would be sitting at the sidelines and just watching the other kids, and you get some of the equipment that allows them to be out there doing it too. Kids can have some control. It builds their self-esteem that they, I can do it myself.
Families don't feel segregated. Families feel included too.
Kai has cerebral palsy and he's pretty involved. I was very fearful that it was just not going to work. I was really committed to making it work, and I came at the beginning and helped him transition. And I don't know if that was more helpful or not to the teachers. They were very willing to accommodate me, and they didn't seem like they were annoyed that I was there, which was very nice. 11. The staff here is amazing, and they've obviously been doing this a long time, and they have so much care and compassion for the kids that it makes a huge difference. I hear stories about how parents had to really fight to get this. It's like there's this fight between schools and parents, and I've never felt that way. Everybody's been so great to us and been very accommodating to our needs, so I appreciate that.
One of the things that I think is most changing in terms of having inclusive environments is also for the change in teachers.
3, 4, 5.
It's taught me, how to have them all work together, what adaptations I might need to make when I'm doing my instruction, looking back on their goals and seeing how I can adapt my specific lessons. It's just been a wonderful experience.
We're able to kind of look over, oh, okay, this is what we're working on, this is our theme, these are what are some activities that we want to throw in there, and how can I make those accommodations I need for, this child who has poor vision, and this child who really can't sit, or this child who he has motor control issues.
One of the keys for the collaboration is being in the classroom together and having open communication.
I get to even do some of the small groups, looking at the whole entirety, and they all benefit from it. The kids do get more individual attention, whether they're a child on an IEP or one that comes in without an IEP. I think it benefits everybody.
We have had teachers who have indicated to us that they would never go back to teaching a classroom without kids with special needs, because it has added an element to their quality of teaching. It has made them become better teachers, and it has been more rewarding for them. So I think that's a powerful statement too of the power of inclusion. It's not just a win for our students with special needs, but it's a win for all students, because they are the ones that are going to make a difference and make a more inclusive life for everybody.
I always just love to see happy kids. There's something about it, that just reminds us why we're here. So I appreciate them having that video for us. So here's the 8 recommendations from that joint. Oh, did you have a question? Yes, that video is available. One of the things that might be in the list that you have on there, one of the things that Cindy has done on our map to inclusion and belonging is she has put in a lot of links, or the videos themselves, of great examples of inclusion, examples of parents, examples of children with disabilities, adults with disabilities, inspiration, educational, all sorts of things. So if it's not specifically linked, you can certainly email, and we'll give you you just email map@wested.org. Wested is who pays the bills. So it's MAP @wested.org, and that would get to Cindy, and if you can't find the link. Because yes, it's something you can show other people. It's out there. I think it's on the DRDP website, I'm pretty sure. The DRDP DR Access website. Yeah, it's really nice. So anyway, these are the recommendations that came out of that joint policy statement, and these recommendations, they have some for state level, and then they have community and local level, and these are the local level, and it really talks about partnering with families. It talks about adhering to whatever the legal process is. You have to make sure that's happening, but then also it talks about accessing and improving the quality of inclusion, reviewing and modifying your resource allocation, and then looking at some of those other things with enhanced professional development, appropriate staffing structures, access to special supports, and formal collaboration. So there is, I believe right behind the PowerPoint, there is a form. I'll be right back because I've got the PowerPoint stack over here. That at the top has our little Beginning Together logo, and it has what's, a survey and reflection on inclusive practice application in your community. And you can go ahead and write on this one because you can download one on the thing. So I want you to think, the first question is, as you think about the law and the research, where do the majority of experiences for families seeking inclusive childcare in your community fall on the continuum below? So think of where you live right now, where you work, where you live. Would you say that most families are not able to access inclusive opportunities? That's a 1. Or that inclusive options are readily available? That's a 5. And you may feel on your way, somewhere in between. So take just a minute and at least do the first one, and then write down what factors, why did you give it that rating? So if you give it a 5, what made you say that it was a 5? If you gave it a 3, what made you say it was a 3? And I know some of you are with peers from your setting, so you might want to answer it without checking, checking with each other first and see if you agree. So at least do just question 1, because we're going to do a little short activity with that one. So again, all I'm asking you to do right now is number 1 and the factors. Because the rest of it's very interesting if you have more time to do with your colleagues, but for right now, just do number 1. So make eye contact when you're done, because people are still working. So for the next part of the activity, you have to use your imagination. Are you ready to use your imagination? I want you to imagine that where the sun is coming in on that side of the clock, there's a big number 1. So if you wrote a 1, you're going to go stand over there. And we're going to say in this corner over here, if you wrote a 2, you're going to stand over there. If you wrote a 3, we're going to stand right up here. If you wrote a 4, you're going to stand right over here by the water that's empty. And if you did a 5, you're going to stand by those double doors. Okay? So please take your piece of paper with you and quietly go to your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, the 1 is on that side of the clock. The 2 is over here by the chart paper. 3 is where I'm standing now, and I'll move. 4 is right over by that table, and 5 is over by the double doors. This is the 3s right here. These are the 2s, 4s, 5s, and 1s. Oh, I'm glad we're not going to have too many 1s because I didn't give you much room. Okay. Oops, I didn't walk. So what I want you to do, whoops. So here's how I want you to discuss. I just put it up here so you can look at it. I want you to find like 1 or 2 people. So, this is a big group. You could all talk together, but it'd be easier if so are you guys the 4s or the 3s? I know, I'm looking at, you're all the 3s. Are you by yourself as a 4? Is there anybody that wouldn't mind talking to her as a 4? That's a high 3? Or I'll have you go talk to the 5s. Go talk to the 5s. Oh, she'll talk to you. Okay. And then the same thing here, the big group. So break into smaller groups. Don't talk to people you know. Break into some smaller groups, 2 or 3 people, and you introduce yourself. See if you had similar reasons for your ranking, and we're going to do some share back in a minute. Make sure everybody gets a chance to talk. Take about 1 more minute. So, since some of you are standing where I have to stand, I'm going to ask you to say goodbye to your friends and go back to your seats. Goodbye to your new friends. I'm going to still ask you some questions, but we'll have you go back there. So, I think it's always very interesting because I try to anticipate where most of the people are going to be. So I know 2s and 3s are often very, and that was true here too. But we did have a 4 and a couple 5s, no 1s, which is good. So this is interesting. Did you find that the factors, for those of you who were 2s, let's say, did you find that the reasons that you ranked a 2 were similar to the other people, or was it very different? She's saying similar. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. It's just, it's always interesting. This is a great thing to do at community meetings and letting people really rank. And then I love the next question, to what extent would the majority of informed parents or family members in your community agree with your rating? Because sometimes you're like, yeah, we got inclusive options. Do parents know? Do families know? No, not typically no. If they are able to speak the language and they have a good socioeconomic background and they have time they can take off and come to meetings, they might. But we have a lot more people in our communities that aren't necessarily accessing this. So I just think that's an important one to think about. So this is just, Pam Wint and I put this together to help people do some thinking about their values, perceptions, and beliefs. As you see down at the bottom, it's like, do you believe in it as an agency, and are you implementing it as an agency? Because if you're implementing but don't believe, it doesn't ever stick. And if you don't implement what you believe, then that's frustrating too. So like I said, this is something that you can certainly use and as a point of conversation. Did anybody have something that came up in their conversation that they really want to share with the larger group? You guys want to share at your own group. So, what did I do with the clicker? Hang on here. Told you I'm dangerous. This box is really funny. All right, so they always say time changes things, but you actually have to change them yourself. Dang it, right? Why can't we just wake up tomorrow and it'll all be done? So when we talk about a change process, we don't really want to blow things up. However, this is one of my favorite quotes. For every complicated problem, there's an answer that is short, simple, and wrong. We'll just let them go to recess and lunch. Short, simple, and wrong. Okay. So what I have tried to get people to think about are the qualities that can happen through managing complex change. This is a change model that I didn't make up, but has been around for a long time, but I love it because it tells you what will happen if you're not doing each of these steps. So the first step that you have to have is a vision. You have to know what you're trying to go for. What do you believe in? What do you want, you know? You then have to say, so how are we going to get incentives? Why should we do this? What's the reason for that? After that, we have to have skills. Because I already told you, people are afraid they're going to do something wrong. So people need skills to feel confident. And then they need resources. I have the skills, now I have to have the time to practice the skills or whatever it is. And finally, there's an action plan that's needed. And when all these things are in place together, what you get is change, which should be in a lighter color because you can't really see it. So that's when you get change. So I think I gave you a good ideas page. Yes, it's bright yellow. You have a good ideas page. And it is, I'm going to go through the complex change model very quickly, but this allows you, if you want to capture some ideas or resources for yourself or your agency on it. So I just made that kind of setup. So here's what happens when you don't have a vision. When you don't have a vision, you get a lot of confusion. You got a lot of confusion. And so it really starts with a vision. And what was the first thing I asked you guys to do when you got here? Read a vision, right? So I just think it's important, and as you all pointed out, there were some things that resonated with you in those visions, and some of you had different pieces. That's an important part of a vision. A vision is to inspire and to provide a goal. So the underlying vision really that we have is that all children in California, including children with disabilities or delays, have access to quality childcare with active participation and appropriate support. So if you had to do, visions are like these quick things, this would be my vision. You can change or adopt it. The policy statement also has kind of a vision, and that's very interesting. And this next one I thought I cut, so I'm going to just cut on it. So you have to think about how you're going to develop a vision. If you're working in a school, you have to get people together. So some of you have to go back and say, how would we do this? Maybe it's just in a classroom. You want to have, what's your vision in your classroom? So it can happen at, again, any level. And it's really useful if families are involved in developing a vision for the bigger kind of group. So you have family members as well. If you do not have incentives, if there's no incentives, I want you to pay attention to the screen because things happen very slowly. You get a lot of resistance and things happen very gradually. So incentives sometimes have the wrong connotation. Basically, the biggest incentive is it's the law. I don't know why that's so hard for people, but it is the law. If you're in Part B of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it's called the Least Restrictive Environment. If you're in Part C of the Individuals with Educations Act and for birth to 3-year-olds, it's called Natural Environments. It's right there. It always has been. At the state level, there's also regulations, and it's something that has to be measured on each IEP. Another incentive, and one that's becoming more and more clear, is the long-term outcomes for children and families are better when there's more inclusion. If there's early inclusion especially, we see the trajectory is better for children. And I'm not talking about dumping. It's not that they're thrown into a program with no supports. That's not inclusion. We're talking about the appropriate supports and access. The other thing is there's good research on outcomes that shows that children will do better with their outcomes when they're in inclusive settings, and personal and program commitments. Sometimes this comes about because somebody really feels passionately. Cindy is our, kind of touchstone around inclusion. She's lived it. She's, done this, and she can really keep us honest. And I think it's helpful to have somebody who it's in their bones a little bit. And then, of course, knowing what the benefits of inclusion are, that can be very helpful. When we talk about children in Part B, which is 3 to 22-year-olds in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the primary goal of education, if you didn't know, is to ensure access to the general curriculum. So those of you who are early childhood special educators or early interventionists, are you familiar with the California Foundations? Yay! A few years ago that wasn't true, so I'm awesome. Because that's your general curriculum, in case people didn't know. The foundations and the frameworks are what we are trying to provide access to. For Part C, it's a different primary goal, and this is what makes everybody crazy. Our goal is not access to the general curriculum from birth to 3. Our goal is to support families to support their children. I think that that's still needed in the preschool years. It's not like that goes away, but this is written into the law, so something to think about. So I provided 2 handouts that go over the key principles and basically pick, if you're working with 3 and above, there's this one that has the like red and orange. This is key principles underlying the IEP process. If you work in early intervention, this is key principles for natural environments. So the other one is natural environments. So just, look at whichever one works for you. Did you guys find them? If you work, as I say, if you work over 3, look at the one that says key principles underlying the IEP process, and it has a picture of 2 kids at the top. If you are under 3, you look at the one that's kind of got the people surrounding the world cartoon. And so on the back of that, I don't know if it's the back or the front, there's a mission and key principles for natural environments. So what I want you to do is read those. There's 7 principles under the goal of ensuring young children are active and successful participants in their community, and that's the IEP one and then the IFSP one. And just read them over and pick one of those principles that resonates with you, and then talk with a partner about it. Talk with your partners, please. Just a couple of minutes. It's going to be short. Yeah. Give the other person a chance to talk because you only got 1 minute. So I know you could talk more, and I would love to let you. However, I'm going to get kicked out of this place at 4:15, so I want to be sure we get through some things. So you guys are, it's okay. They're passionate in this, about this. That's okay. I'm calling you back. And I think I spend a lot of time on incentives because I think we underestimate the power of the incentives. So I just want to give you a couple of more ideas. Here's a parent's perspective. The road to full inclusion begins at birth. When families are required to dramatically change their normal routines in order to access services, the additional stress that this promotes in their lives becomes yet another barrier to their ability to begin life outside of the mainstream, perhaps never getting in. And that's what happens, is if you start outside, it's harder later. So this is from the policy statement, just talks about what inclusion is required, the definition of least restrictive environment right out of the law, the definition of natural environments right out of the law. And I have found that some people really are helped by saying, where would this child be if they didn't have a disability? And that includes neighborhoods and family events. You know, we don't think of that. As I was an early interventionist for my first career, and I'll never forget, was serving a family, and the child was only comfortable in one room of their house. If they went into any other room, the child just screamed. That was not, so what we worked on is what was going on, what made this child comfortable in that environment, how could we move so that this child could be in other environments, because right now that family didn't have access to their house, let alone going to visit grandma or friends. So, you know, sometimes it's that simple to think with families. We also find sometimes people do well with an is and is not. And so my favorite is the last one here. It is a location that is part of the community where children and families without disabilities go and spend their time. It is not chosen because it has special equipment or chosen because it was convenient for the specialists who work with the child. Oops. So what does this mean for me? And I appreciated this. This person said the family-centered process never removes the family from their natural environment, but rather works with the family to make their environment more responsive to the child's needs. We as service providers are challenged to value the family's typical routines so that they make their supports and services fit the family instead of the family having to fit the service delivery method. And that's really inconvenient if you don't want to work evenings and weekends, but there you go. The other really helpful document around incentives is the DEC, which is the Division for Early Childhood, and the NAYC, which is the National Association for the Education of Young Children, Joint Position Statement on Inclusion. And I don't think I printed this for you, but it's also available as a handout. And basically, they talk about three things. Access, you got to be there. Participation, you have to be more than just sitting in the room, you have to be participating, and supports, which goes back to supporting children in ways that are going to promote their belonging. And then this is something you may not know about, but, and this is part of the push for inclusion right now. Our Department of Education, the California Department of Education, through the Early Learning and Care Division and the Special Ed Division, put out a joint letter saying, this is what we want to be seeing. We want inclusion. So if you haven't seen that joint letter, it's really important to understand this is the commitment from the highest levels in the state. So I don't know if you remember what Cindy was saying as some of the frustration is there hasn't always seemed to be clear messaging and commitment from the state level, and there is now. So, yay! And so why do we care? This is where Phil Strain, I don't know how many of you know Phil Strain, most people have read something by him because he's been a researcher in the field of disability, particularly autism, for a long time. But he's kind of plain spoken, and he says, high quality inclusive settings are the only environments with data that consistently supports children's superior learning, and non-inclusive environments have been shown to negatively impact children's learning. Fully inclusive options beat the alternative at a ratio of about 15-1. So he and Robin McWilliams, which is McWilliam, no S, who's another researcher, will often say, don't ask me to improve inclusion works to you. We've done that. You've got to prove to me why you think this segregated setting is working, because it's not. So, ouch, right. These guys, that guy and Robin McWilliam. So, this somebody said earlier, all children are general education children. Special education's a program. It's not a program, but specialized supports and services. And when we have goals really addressed appropriately throughout an inclusive setting, they get worked on all day, every day, not just the one day a week they see the speech therapist. So here's one of the research pieces that Phil Strain did that shows the end of third grade outcomes for children who were in non-inclusive settings is the orange, and children who were in inclusive settings is the blue. And so on these tests, which were used by a variety of psychologists, they all did much better, the ones that were in inclusive settings. So we've got the data. And then who benefits? You know, one of the things that we find is sometimes people will focus on the benefits to the child with a disability, which is fine. That's great. We want the child with a disability to benefit, to thrive. But they're not the only ones who benefit. It benefits all the children. The other children learn that there's multiple ways of doing things. They learn that you don't always have to be the fastest to get things done, or whatever they learn, you know. I think for families and parents, if they find their child has a diagnosis later, or they then have a child that is born with a diagnosis and they were exposed to this whole inclusive world, that gives them a different vision. And those children are going to grow up and be the employers of the future and be the legislators. So we want everybody to be there. And staff will always say how much more they learned, as you saw in the video. Specialists learn. A lot of times specialists are trained to work one-on-one, you know, a lot of the occupational therapists or speech therapists, and having to see the whole group and how that works really can help them understand, oh, I've been expecting things from children that typically developing children don't do. I got to readjust some of this. And of course, the community benefits in the long run. And if you sat around and asked people what doesn't work about inclusion, you can just make a long list. But if you start saying, well, what's the benefits? And let's focus on those. The reason focusing on those is those are real. The benefits are real, and it's helpful for us to keep those in mind. Also, if you know the benefits, you're more willing to work at some of the barriers, you know, because you know it's going to be worth it in the long run. And it helps us keep going when things are tough. So really thinking about what incentives can impact your community. You know, what are some ways that you can think about that? I think that for many special educators, the fear is we lose control. If it's our classroom, we know what we're doing. If it's somebody else's classroom, I don't have control. So it's hard, and we have to switch to a more consultative model, and we just have some suggestions for when you're consulting, how you can do that by joining the team that the family has and pushing in services rather than pulling out. So if you're consulting, it's really important that we keep parents and family members in the loop so that we don't develop a great relationship with the child care partner and make all these decisions, and then the parent's like, wait, what happened? So, you know, I have some suggestions, and I just overthought I could do more things. So I'm going to go to, if we don't have this, oh, I skipped the skills altogether. If we don't have skills, you've got fear and anxiety. So the skills is about a lot of the other workshops, so I didn't do this one. Here's if you don't have the resources, you get frustration, right? a lot of frustration. So I think it's important to think about who makes things happen. So all of you are in different places. You have to think about who are the decision makers, who really makes things happen, who's preventing things from happening. Are there gatekeepers that maybe they just don't know that this is kind of happening, like showing them the joint letter from the departments can help move principals and other kinds of things. And again, there's great information in the policy statement about the resource reallocation. But you do have to remember it's a process, and it will happen in different ways. But everybody gets there. And finally, if you don't have an action plan, then you get a lot of false starts in separate directions. So look, I'm not too bad. So look on your good ideas sheet. I know I just like blasted through the last part. And just think, are there any things that you want to do from a resource perspective? Looking back at some of the incentives. I didn't even touch on the skills, but there's lots of them. Actually, the book Inclusion Works talks about a lot of the most common modifications and adaptations that are done. And this book was written 10 years ago, and we are in the process of updating it and doing videos to go with it. And they are going to come out, I would like to say within this year, but we'll see. So just so you know, it's still got good stuff, even though it's the earlier version. Yes, question.
How could we prepare parents to work on getting their children into inclusion? Because there's a fear.
Right. So her question, and it's a great one, how can we help parents not be afraid of inclusion? Because I think parents do sometimes have a lot of fear. I think that we can certainly talk about outcomes and what their child can benefit from. We also could show them videos of other parents and of settings. And we have to also be realistic and acknowledge their fear. So if their fear is this child's going to get trampled, then maybe they don't go to a basic childcare program with just minimum ratios and no quality. Maybe they need to go to a Head Start or early Head Start or a state preschool or someplace that has, a little bit more adult support. Because I know parents a lot of times, and I think for many families, their experience with disability may be an aging parent or grandparent. Grandma had a stroke, okay, then she needed physical therapy and speech therapy every day. That's what we must need. And it's like, that's not how it works in kids. And they don't know that. That's their only model. So helping parents know about those other things. Cindy, do you have an idea for that? For how to help parents? You can't be seen over there, so come here.
Actually, I do. I have a bunch of resources that you can share with parents. And since I will have all of your email addresses. I'm sorry.
Turn this one off so it doesn't beep.
Okay, so the question was, you wanted to know how to include how to get parents excited about inclusion, because they have fears too. And I have lots of resources that will help get parents excited and will help ease the fear of actually other parents who don't have kids with disabilities. Anyway, so I have a set of resources. I have all of your email addresses, and I'll also put some of this information in the next newsletter for the people in the virtual world whose email addresses I don't have.
But if you email matt@wested.org.
And if you have a specific question, or you want it to be added to my mailing list, the MAP newsletter mailing list, do map@wested.org. And if I could just take, I also want to make another plug for the Inclusion Facilitator Institute. We have one more institute. It's in San Diego at the end of, it's in from the 9th to the 12th in San Diego, and it's the 14th to the 16th now. Uh-oh, the websites. Anyway, December. Okay, so Linda's going to have it up. It is on the Map to Inclusion and Belonging website. There's a rotating advertisement, as well as
This is the website, cainclusion.org. Can you repeat it?
cainclusion.org takes you to the MAP website. And you can go either to Beginning Together
So Beginning Together has the
flyer for the Institute.
9th to 11th, you're right.
Got that? It's the 9th to the 11th of December in San Diego. I think there's still openings.
I think it may be closed, but you could email.
Email, if you're just raring to go, you might be able to get in. And then the other thing, I want to make a plug for the last session that I was in. It was the buildings block session with Eileen Schwartz. In the Institute, we use the building blocks book to explain how to implement inclusion. So I just wanted to give a plug for that. And then I'm going to do the drawing. So do you want to draw?
She's mixed them up.
Okay, I have Elizabeth Lab. Is she here? Okay, and you're extra lucky because I brought one too. And I have Mary Harper. Mary Harper. All right.
So this book is also downloadable, free, on that Map to Inclusion and Belonging website. And I'm just going to pull down and show you. We have a whole section on Inclusion Works. And if you go to that section, the book is downloadable. So you can get that there. So thank you very, very much. I know, wow, I just blasted through the end. But if you, have questions, just feel free to reach out to us. And I know those of you who are inclusion facilitators, you will learn that this takes longer than I thought. So that's good to know. All right, and thank you guys. Have a great rest of your conference.